COVID-19, why you do this to me? I really don't like being stuck in quarantine. I have no toilet paper, I don't even have a snack. Hey, coronavirus, I want my life back.
Hello, Isolators. What a day. What a day I got out today, which was lovely. And you're going to see, actually, that I got out today. Coming up in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking to the professor who helped to author a study that determined if you spend 2 hours a week in nature, the forest, the beach, whatever, at just 2 hours, that you will significantly improve your mental health and your entire physical well-being. So that's going to be really interesting, and it's so easy to do, right? It is so easy to do. Mike Robin, is your birthday today. Happy birthday to you, sir. Yeah, you didn't think we'd forget, do you? Well, I mean, didn't get a cake or anything, but happy birthday to you. Mike Robin has, of course, agreed to co-host the show with me on Friday from his vantage point in Cochrane. So happy birthday. And I am very, that is going to be my grateful. I am grateful for Mike Robin as a friend. We've known each other for a few years now. It started out just sort of a social media thing, but no, I've grown to admire him and want to wish him a happy birthday. So I am grateful to Mike. Nobody else can be grateful for Mike, okay? I got it. I got him. What else are you grateful for? I'm grateful for all the attention I got today, said Mike. I hope you got a lot of attention, Diana. Grateful that we are all back together. I'm grateful for that, too. And I'm grateful that you were able to do without me yesterday. And thank you to Parker for keeping the ship afloat and running everything here. Went up to Sudbury and came back. The documentary that I did, the mini doc we did on the homeless, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We have some of your comments coming up as well. What's that one? Liking the goatee. Diana, yeah. It's getting there. There's a lot of more gray in it than I thought there would be. You know what, though? Who was it? Carol sent me a goatee guide. Can we bring the goatee guide up? Let's bring the goatee guide up and just get out of the way here. And so we have to decide, seeing as we've decided that I'm going to have the goatee because of the goat line, which kind of goatee I'm going to have. Am I going to have the full goatee, which is pretty well what it is now, but you just can't see it. The anchor goatee, or Robert Downey Jr. there. I don't know, a little cleaner. I kind of like the anchor goatee. The landing strip, that's what they call it. That's what they call it. The pure goatee. Is there a difference between the pure goatee and the anchor goatee? I don't know. The Van Dyke, that's just evil, I think, right? And the pretty boy goatee. Well, maybe the pretty boy or the anchor goatee. What do you think? What do you think? Which one? We'll have a poll one day. As soon as it grows in a little bit, you can actually see it. It's a little bushier. We'll have a poll for that one day. What else did we want to talk about today? It is Wednesday, and we are going to have our reunion show on Friday. So I'm getting in touch with Willow and her dad. Mike's going to be joining me. We're going to have all sorts of fun on Friday, and as a family, as an Isolator family. So now, I want to get to that study. And this is fantastic. These researchers have found, it was a British study, researchers have found that if you can spend 2 hours, not less, not more, actually they're very specific, and you're going to hear why. If you spend 2 hours a week in nature, and it can be 20 minutes today, a half hour the next day, 20 minutes a day, as long as it adds up to 2 hours by the end of the week. So let's have a listen to the study and talk to the author of the study. Now, I couldn't just do this. I just couldn't do this interview here. I had to go somewhere else to do the interview. So this is where I ended up. I ended up down by the river. Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for joining me. You in your room, me
out enjoying nature.
Hi, good evening.
This is a really fascinating study, but it almost seems intuitive that we should have known this.
Yeah, I think most people know it intuitively. That's not the question. For us, the really interesting things are increasingly in the UK, we're seeing doctors trying to prescribe time in nature for people, for example, with depression, anxiety disorders, and they want to support these kind of activities, but they then say, well, how long is good enough? So what the study was really about was trying to understand how much do people need as a bare minimum, really, to improve their health and well-being.
And you've actually come up with a definitive time, a number, 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours a week, it seems. So, I mean, the data was drawn from 20,000 interviews in England by the Department of Environment. So it's a government-sponsored survey that is fully representative of the English population. It was carried out over 5 years. And what we were able to do is pool all the data together and work out that compared to people who don't spend any time a week in nature, you needed to spend at least 2 hours a week to see noticeable benefits in your mental health. So 60 minutes a week, not enough. 3 hours a week was slightly better, but not enormously better. So what you see, there's been a lot of talk about curves with COVID and everything. What you see is a diminishing curve, so that at 2 weeks is great, 3 weeks a little bit better, 4 weeks you're starting to plateau, and people who are spending several hours a week are actually seeing worse mental health than sort of 2 to 3 hours. So there seems to be a real optimal point here.
There are similar studies as well. I mean, just look at Japanese forest bathing, where they found just simply being in the forest improves your well-being.
Yeah, that's really interesting, the research they've done. And what they've shown is not just self-report measures that we have here. They've looked at a whole range of physiological indices, including things like killer T cells, to show that stress is reduced in these environments. There's clear physiological processes that people are aware of. So when they say they feel good, what they're really reporting is changes in their physiological states. Again, the critical thing is how long should a session be and how long over the course of the week. So what we found was that actually it didn't matter how you got your 2 hours a week. It could be in one long session on a Sunday. It could be 4 lots of 30 minutes at lunchtime. And the beautiful thing about that is, we've all got different lifestyles. Some people can find 2 hours, other people can't. The idea is as long as over the course of a week you get up to 120 minutes or 2 hours, that seemed to be the critical thing.
So here I am sitting here, beautiful scenery, the forest, the river. What's happening to me right now?
Well, a whole range of things are probably happening. Let's assume it's a relatively benign forest. There's no tree felling and so on going on. The first thing that's happening is in your classic urban environment, there's lots of noise, there's lots of movement, there's lots of visual things to look at, and also lots of dangers, crossing the road and so on and so forth. So what's happening is your cognitive processes are on their alert for danger, and that's depleting. So after a period of time, you get tired, your batteries in a sense run low. When you go into a relatively safe natural environment like a woodlands, there's less demands on your visual senses, there's less demands on your hearing, there are less things to worry about unless you've got bears and whatnot. So therefore you can start to relax. And there's that relaxation process. I mean, we can find it tracing through the brain, through the cortisol that you release, which is a stress hormone, and so on. So there's this relaxation at the physiological level, but there's also the kind of things you think about. So I'm a psychologist, so I'm interested in things like depression and anxiety, and these are classically associated with negative rumination, negative thoughts about the self. What we tend to find in natural environments is that people stop worrying so much about themselves and how they're perceived because there isn't people around them, and they start to open up to the wonders of the world more by reflecting on the mindful connection to the natural environment around them. So they're not beating themselves up so much. So in two senses, you're getting less stress from the outside world, and you're also getting less stress from yourself on the internal dialogues. So we think nature can help in both those ways.
Does this explain why it is so relaxing, for instance, right now, just to watch the water flowing? A lot of times too, people say that just watching a fire, they just get
so you
mesmerized, hypnotized by
absolutely spot on. So way back in the 80s, a couple of researchers called Kaplan, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, came up with this idea of soft fascination. And what you've described is what they call soft fascination. So it's the idea that something grabs your attention, but in a soft and gentle way. So a loud car horn would be hard fascination. It's like, oh God, what's that? What have I done wrong? Where do I not need to go? Soft fascination is it captures your attention in a rhythmic, moving way in which a fire does or a river does. So it's not that you're completely daydreaming, you're captured by some movement, but that it's not threatening, and that's the crucial thing. So for example, if people are attracted to water, like you say, or fire, because there is at least movement, a big barley field on a still day probably is quite boring because there's not that kind of attraction. Everything's very regular, there's no movement.
First of all, I just want to slightly correct you on something you said. You said way back in the 80s. I don't recall it being way back. I recall the 80s being just a short time ago. Let's get to some definitions. So a forest, urban forest, a natural forest, difference.
So England, unfortunately, we don't have the breadth of real natural spaces that you do, say, in Canada. So even our most wild spaces are very highly managed. So this data in England really can only speak to that. But nevertheless, what we find is that the patterns are generally very similar, but there are two environments in the UK which are particularly good: beach environments and uplands. So that's our equivalent of hills and so on, not quite mountains. What we tend to find is, though, that there are two very different types of group of people who visit these places. So first of all, it's much more middle class and rich people who visit the uplands and the hills. The beaches attract the whole sectors of society. And that's really quite important for us, in a sense, because one of the big problems in the UK are health inequalities. So that we know that the richest people live in the nicest areas. The urban parks in richer areas are nicer than the urban parks in poorer areas. So how do we address some of those issues? First of all, we can improve the quality of parks in urban areas. Secondly, we can support people accessing the more wild spaces like beaches that all sectors of society enjoy and work with. So there is a gradation in where's best. But even within, say, an urban park setting, there's a gradation in terms of, I mean, it's probably the same in Toronto, I don't know. But I bet you the richer areas have nicer green spaces. So another issue is how can we improve the quality of green spaces in poorer areas to reduce that gap in health?
My first impression when I was reading this study was that this was a mental health study, but there are practical uses, like you just mentioned, urban planning.
Oh, sure. So we work with urban planners. We've been working on 7 intervention sites where we've improved access, particularly to water environments, because that's one of my particular interests, in deprived urban neighbourhoods, and monitored the health and well-being of the populations over time, over a 2-year period, pre and post. And to cut a long story short, what we found is improving the access quite often improves feelings of safety. It reduces levels of crime. And it's a lot to do with that risk that I said earlier. You enter these spaces in the urban area and it's like, where's the dangers? Who are the people I don't want to be near? You improve the quality and it sends out a message as this is quite often, not in all cases, but quite often, this is a space for everyone. It gets more used. There are more eyes on the ground, if you like. People feel safer and their mental health improves because now they can relax, whereas before they were stressed.
Perhaps, though, we need to make a bit of a change in how we treat mental health. When you look at some mental health institutions, they're very sterile. Nothing on the walls, very little color, very little stimulation, sterile.
Yeah. So there's a guy called Roger Ulrich in the States that's been working particularly with a range of institutions, hospitals, institutions for supporting people with mental health issues and prisons, and including things like introducing plants and introducing nature paintings versus abstract paintings and so on. And they've shown, for example, far less use of restraint, less use of medication to calm patients in these wards and so on. So bringing nature indoors is also an important step if people can't get out. Ourselves, we've done work in dentist surgeries using virtual reality. So with people with having dental operations, obviously you can't really do these in the forest for health reasons, but you could go for a walk, and people can do, or go for a virtual walk along the beach through the forest, and what you see is lower pain and more acceptance of more complicated surgery in the surgeries where we've got VR. And not only for the patient, the dentists prefer it because the patient's less stressed, right? So they're easier to work with. And then for example, we follow them up a week later and say, how painful was that? And their estimates of the pain are much lower than people who didn't have VR. Now, why that's important is when you decide to go back to your dentist, you're having a memory of how painful it was. So for a lot of people, they don't go back to their dentist, for example, and other treatments because they don't want to undergo pain. If we can short circuit that negative loop, their dental health will improve, for example.
So bottom line is I can go into a forest, into a natural setting for 20 minutes today, maybe 30 minutes tomorrow, as long as it adds up to 120 minutes a week. And I should experience some sort of improvement in my overall well-being.
Right. So, I mean, this data was technically cross-sectional, so it's not causal, but it's perfectly consistent with a lot of experimental studies. And the BBC over here, the British Broadcasting Corporation, heard about our study and were like, well, this looks interesting, but we don't necessarily believe it. So, because they're quite skeptical of some of messages around. So there's a series called Trust Me, I'm a Doctor that tests research that's coming out. And they ran our study up in Scotland with a group of volunteers, and they assigned them to do 120 minutes a week out in nature or less, and they completely replicated our research. And the presenter of the program, Dr. Michael Mosley, said, I completely endorse this research as a doctor and would support people getting out for 120 minutes a week. So in that sense, I think, the research is probably vindicated.
Are there any caveats here that we need to watch out for?
Yeah, so obviously there are a range of issues in terms of safety. So, for example, we've got things like ticks, mosquitoes, you maybe have bears, whatever. So that there are very real threats. There are also things like pollen, which might not sound too dangerous, but if you've got asthma, we see hundreds of thousands of people admitted to hospital with various allergic reactions. So there are a whole range of threats. The trouble is we're trying to balance the known threats, which tend to be the focus of research and policy, on the benefits and quantify the benefits. So it's about measuring those up. One of the big problems is who's going to fund all the research for quality, access, and so on. In the UK, the funding is cut. It's the first thing to go in local authority. So one of the big things we're trying to do is put an economic value on these benefits. So for one piece of work we did with Public Health England was to estimate about £2.5 billion a year in cost savings to the health service from the physical activity done in urban parks, for example. When we can start putting a cost value and savings on it, then it justifies investment into improving these places.
A lot of funding, of course, for these studies comes from pharmaceuticals, but in this case, they can't put this into pill form. So I guess you're not going to get any funding from them.
Well, that's an interesting observation. So I'll make 2 points on that. I mean, first of all, I think we've been clear here, this isn't an alternative to medication treatment for people with anxiety and depression. We're not claiming this is a magic pill. We would say this would be a complementary therapy. We're not going that far. The other thing I'd probably say it's interesting that this data hasn't yet been challenged by the pharmaceutical industry. When it is, that's going to be interesting because I'm guessing they're taking it more seriously.
You're not done yet. You've taken this study and gone worldwide. You're studying 18 countries now. Can you give me a bit of a hint as to what you may have found, especially when it comes to Canada?
Yeah, so Canadians do fit. They seem to show a very similar pattern to the UK. As I said, some of the work we do is on waterscapes. And what we've noticed in the Canadian sample is, inland waters are extremely important recreational sites where people spend obviously a lot of time. And what you see is that the big lakes, so there's a researcher called Amber Pearson who's particularly studied the Canadian big lakes and showing just how important they are for mental health and well-being. So, I mean, you guys, a lot of people seem to get out into the real wilderness, which is really benefiting their health and well-being. But nevertheless, in Canada, you don't have to get out in the wilderness to still be showing some of these benefits. Even local urban parks can do the job.
We've talked a lot about the mental health pandemic that could possibly follow this pandemic. In other words, people having been shut in a lot of cases, away from nature for a long time. Has this factored into your study?
We've been doing some research, what's been going on during the lockdown, because in Europe, different countries have different regulations. So in the UK, we were allowed to go out once a day to public parks, and that was directly a response to the sort of evidence we've been discussing, where the government recognises the value to mental health. In Spain, for example, people were literally locked down into their house. And we've been looking at data across Europe to see how people have been reacting with nature and how that's affected their mental health. So to cut a long story short, if you at least have a view of a park or the sea or something, your mental health is better. So views were also important during lockdown. And obviously, the more access people had, the lower their symptoms of depression and anxiety. So it's going to be interesting coming out of lockdown to see how people cope, sure.
Well, Professor, we've talked for almost 20 minutes, so I just have another hour, 40 minutes to go before I start to feel better. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.
Okay.
Yeah, see that? You can't see the isolator because of the trees. But very interesting. The study is extremely simple in its results. That's what I love about it. You get out for 2 hours in nature a week, and you will notice an improvement in your mental health and your physical health. Now, a couple of things here. He was telling me it doesn't work if you tell someone to do it. So I said, could we get doctors to prescribe it or things? Apparently, the effects are only there if you decide on your own and you do it on your own, because if not, it becomes a task, right? It becomes a task. It can be the beach. It can be a view as well. So if you're a shut-in or you can't get out, just viewing nature. So if you overlook a park, if you're lucky enough for that, or overlooking some trees and just sort of enjoy being there and sort of staring off into them, also has the same impacts. He's promised to keep me posted when the update on the study comes out, because then we're going to get some more Canadian numbers. But for the most part, they do seem to parallel those in the UK. I would love to tell you that it will accomplish everything for you. You still have to eat better. You still have to exercise. You still have to take care of yourself. But this is one more thing you can add to your regimen of really improving yourself. Also, I noticed in there, I look like a bum. I got this hair coming out all over the place now. I need my haircut. I don't know if this goatee is working for me or not. I mean, it works for the goat line, but I don't know. So we're going to have to see. What would you think? Is there anybody out there, a professional hairstylist, a barber, who could talk us into cutting my hair? Maybe Parker could cut my hair, and we could have someone like... Can you do it yourself? Well, I need this. This is getting really bad.
Put a bowl on your head and cut off the...
Oh, put a bowl on your head and cut the... Okay. No, I'm not going to let Parker cut my hair. I really want to do that. Okay, you know what time it is. It is time for the Goat Line. 647-793-GOAT. And for all the newcomers, the only reason it's the Goat Line is because, well, that's why I'm doing the goatee, is because of the Goat Line. So it's not because of this. It is just the only phone number we get that actually spelled something. So we're living with it. A lot of people commenting on the Goat Line about yesterday's mini doc on the homeless. So let's have a listen and answer the Goat Line.
Hey, Kevin, it's Will Menzies from Magic 106 here in Guelph, K-Dub. Just wanted to leave you a message. Last night's show, I got to watch it just before I went on the air this afternoon. And, wow, it was incredible seeing the perspective of people who are living on the streets, two human beings, a perspective that I don't think we hear enough.
Hello, my Isolator family. It's Paula Barton calling. First and foremost, thank you, Kevin, for being there every night for us. Thank you, Parker, for keeping the show running. And for the graphic giggles. Kevin Bacon, Kevin Pickle, love it.
I haven't seen that for a bit.
Yesterday was my 70th day away from my family, work family, and friends. I really didn't think I could handle the isolation with my young, onset, rapidly progressing dementia husband alone. You have all given me the strength to keep putting one foot forward every day, to take each day with patience and grace. Bless you all. See you tonight. Stay cool.
We
Bye.
are here for you and for everyone.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, Parker. I just watched your documentary that you aired on tonight's show. And all I can say is, wow. I've known individuals just like these two gentlemen over the 10 years that I've been involved in the homelessness community. And you know what? I think we can end homelessness altogether. But what we have to do is we have to look at all of those underlying issues that cause homelessness in the first place. And you were actually naming them right on the head. Mental health issues, addiction issues, lack of affordable housing. We have to focus on making sure that everybody has a roof over their head. You keep documentaries like that coming there, Kevin, and I'll be out of the job pretty soon. I hope.
I hope so too. The Goat Line, thank you very much. Leave a message anytime on the Goat Line, 647-793-GOAT. That's 697-793-4628. There was one message that came in on the Goat Line just a short time ago. Who was this one from? This is Patricia, wasn't it? I think. Okay, here we go. You ready? Here we go. I had to put the speaker on.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday
Everybody.
to you.
Happy birthday,
Mike.
dear Mike.
Happy birthday
to you.
Lots of love from Pat. Bye.
All right. Thank you to Pat for doing that. We're going to do a virtual tour of a bunch of places tomorrow. Museums. We're going to take you to the top of the CN Tower. We're going to take you out to Niagara Falls. We're going to get you out and about tomorrow. And then Friday, of course, is our reunion show. And I'm looking at the monitor. I don't know about this goatee. I don't know. And the hair everywhere. Okay. Thank you once again for spending a little bit of your evening with me. Go for a walk in the forest and enjoy. And happy birthday, Mike. We'll talk to you, of course, on Friday when you help to co-host the show. So take care of yourself and take care of each other.
COVID-19, why you do this to me? I really don't like being stuck in quarantine. I have no toilet paper, I don't even have a snack.